history of driving games is brought to you by the all-new Chevy Sonic. You could probably drive around the world in less time than it would take to recount the entirety of racing video games. Excluding motocross, power-ups, and car combat, there are thousands of releases to consider. Even so, there is a select group of driving games that have paved the way for all future releases, and we're placing them in the winner's circle with this look back at the genre. Grand Track 10, released by Atari in 1974, is recognized as the first arcade driving game complete with a steering wheel, pedals, and a 4-gear shift. Midway brought a speed race around the same time, which included collision detection, and the 70s paved the road for numerous driving arcade machines and home console titles alike. Night Driver tested a first-person view, 1980's Rally X is the first known use of background music, and 81's Turbo introduced the first enclosed cockpit arcade cabinet. Turbo is also known for pioneering a rear-view perspective in driving games, but Atari's Pole Position in 1982 achieved a level of performance players had never seen before. Pole Position got a sequel in 1983, references from Judas Priest and the Goonies, and a loosely based cartoon show. Early innovations like split-screen multiplayer in Pit Stop for the Commodore 64 and force feedback control from TX1 kept the genre slowly growing. Our first taste of real 3D racing came from Jeff Crammond's Revs in 1984 for the BBC microcomputer. Ported to the Commodore 64 in 1985, Revs has been called the genesis of the driving simulator. Dabbling in various genres, Crammond became committed to racing with the release of Formula One Grand Prix 7 years later. Grand Prix has gotten 3 sequels since, the last in 2002. Grand Prix introduced driver customization, car modification, drafting, and instant replays. While the PC led the race toward realism, the genre gambled on gimmicks. The warm and sunny Outrun in 1986 let you select your music track and course direction, Rad Racer from Square on the NES appeared in crude 3D, and Hard Drivin' for the arcade pushed the use of polygons, often running at ridiculously low frame rates in its many ports. Sega sped up the 3D competition with Virtua Racing in 1992. The enhanced polygon count could be appreciated in one of 4 viewpoints the player could swap between on the fly. The first example of Sega's Model 1 arcade technology, the game was upgraded to deluxe and formula versions in arcades and drove over to the Sega 32X, Saturn, and Dreamcast. Namco's response was Ridge Racer in 1993. Developing its own brand of drift-heavy arcade action, the franchise sped into living rooms with the launch of the PlayStation, and in arcades, it boasted a cabinet featuring a life-size roadster in front of a 10-foot screen. Ridge Racer was also there at the launch of the PS2, PS3, and Xbox 360, and one will be available at the release for the upcoming PlayStation Vita. Ridge Racer is synonymous with arcade driving, but the highest-grossing machine of all time is Daytona USA. Surpassing its competitor's frame rate, Daytona's tracks were fully texture-mapped, and 4 twin cabinets could be hooked up for unprecedented 8-player showdowns. NASCAR gave its license to the Papyrus Design Group in 1994. The developers worked on the brand until it was taken over by Electronic Arts 10 years later. Papyrus is also considered one of the forerunners of modern simulation racers, as its games featured real drivers, tracks, and sponsors, vehicle damage, car tuning, and much more. Cruisin' USA, Sega Rally Championship, and San Francisco Rush ruled arcades in the 90s, despite a growing trend of home consoles taking a commanding lead in the genre. Midway's Cruisin' series fondly distorted popular locations around the world, Sega Rally introduced alternate terrain types to affect handling, and San Francisco Rush emphasized big jumps in big cities. Colin McRae would later pick up the rally mantle for a self-titled franchise that would eventually become Dirt. In 1994, Road and Track sponsored a game with the goal to recreate realistic and varied sights and sounds in modern racing. The result was The Need for Speed, developed by Distinctive Software and published by Electronic Arts. It started on the 3DO, but eventually joined the roster of the PlayStation, Saturn, and PC. The need was felt enough to keep the sequels coming for more than 18 years. Hot Pursuit, Underground, and Shift represent the biggest changes in series conventions, and this year's The Run showed that EA's schedule for the long-running series has no intention of slowing down. Not known for its strides in authentic driving simulation, Sony employed Kazunori Yamauchi to spend over 5 years building a lifelike racing experience for the original PlayStation. Gran Turismo, being the best of both these worlds, would go on to sell over 10 million units, and spawn 4 major sequels and handheld versions that have collectively sold over 60 million units. The turn of the century saw a surge in illegal street racing that was inevitably glorified on both the silver screen and in video games. Games like Midnight Club in 2000 and Juiced embraced the culture. At the same time, the genre continued to splinter further, and games based on crashing like Burnout or lawlessness like Driver expanded the genre to new themes. Eventually, competitors challenged Gran Turismo's claim as the real driving simulator. Project Gotham Racing rewarded points for stylish play, and Forza Motorsport managed to include damage to its massive roster of licensed cars. This brings us to the glorious HD generation we're currently racing through. Most of these franchises have landed the jump to widescreen high definition with style. Accolade's old Test Drive series was the first to develop an MMO environment in Test Drive Unlimited. The zany Trackmania generated 3 sequels after being embraced by an eccentric Machinima-inspired PC community, and Codemaster's Toka touring car franchise finally made a name for itself as Grid. The tried-and-true franchises are still letting new installments out of the garage, while other developers are willing to take risks with fresh experiences like Blur and Split Second. Driving games have come a long way over the last few decades, and as one of the most accessible genres in the medium, there's no sign of them hitting the brakes. Be it in a cockpit or on a couch, man will never falter in his pursuit of speed, and video game developers will continue to be more than happy to oblige.